Welcome to my budget deck channel where I usually make decks as cheap and playable as possible. So if this is something you would be interested in, then why not subscribe? But today it is time for another set review. Let's talk about, is this pack worth buying? Are the cards in here any good? And could Konami have potentially done a bit of different job with the rarities? We will be talking about all of this, and we start right off with our, Grand Master of Tri-brigade. Well, there's a bigger one now actually, and this is precisely the reason for why I decided to do this set review now, because now most of the cards that would be part of these decks are. Tri-brigade is still lacking, I think, one quick spell if I'm not mistaken, or two at this rate, but other than that, Dogmatika got their new stuff, Springans got their new stuff, so I can finally talk about this pack because I really like this pack. Spoiler alert, this pack will be one of the better ones in terms of value for your gems. But other than that, let's talk about Tri-brigade. Shurek, the Ominous Omen, is an ultra rare as the boss monster of Tri-brigade. I didn't expect much different, but that's absolutely fine. You only need like one or two of this anyway. And purest Tri-brigade decks don't need that many ultra rares other than this one. So if you just manage to pick up one, it's not too bad either. But two is usually kind of the sweet spot for this deck, if I'm not mistaken. And this card's effect is still pretty good. When it came out, very, very good. Now it's, well, still absolutely decent. You have ways of sending it to the graveyard to search Beast Warrior monsters as well, and so on and so on and so on. So I feel like this card is very, very interesting because it has two effects on board, and one if it's sent to the graveyard, doesn't even have to be from the field. So you can have that search as well. So very, very good start already to this pack. Let's see what we have in stock now. We have Springans Ship Explorer, a card that I understand why it's an ultra rare. It was seen kind of as the boss monster of Springans. And for the fact that Springans are also in with Tri-brigades, a very, very cheap deck that you can easily build within like 4 or 5 ultra rares and like 8 to 9 super rares, if even. So very, very nice pickup in general. Plus, you only need one of this. You don't need that many of it. And the effect is okay. It's decent removal. It's not too crazy. It can dodge out of stuff, so it can come back a lot of the time. And you can technically hard make it as well. So yeah, it's not a card that you necessarily super need anymore in Springans. You used to be very, very strong, but now you have the whole Sargas line and whatnot, which is a bit more expensive and a bit better than this one. But it is what it is. This card is still not a bad card and makes absolutely sense that this is an ultra rare. We have the other ultra rare for Dogmatika. We have Fleur de Lis, and also Dogmatika sadly has a few more ultra rares. We have the newest ritual monster as well, which is an ultra rare. We have obviously this card, which is an ultra rare, but you get away with only playing like 1 or 2 of this, so you don't need to pick up that many. And you can already see there's a bit of a trend here with the ultra rares. Usually you don't need that many of it, so if you open this pack, you'll probably get a good skeleton of 3 different decks, and 3 different decks that aren't too shabby anyway. So that's something to keep in mind. This card can disrupt your opponent. It's searchable. What else do you want? Obviously, could have been a super rare because it's not an extra deck monster, but then on the other hand, Dogmatika don't really have that many extra deck monster. Funny enough, they have one which isn't really part of their playstyle besides sending it to the graveyard, but you can incorporate it into multiple different playstyles. We have next up the other Dogmatika card, even though it's not named it, which is a bit annoying from time to time because otherwise you could cycle this card a lot easier, but I guess that's why they didn't want it to be named Dogmatika. And this one is your play starter. Well, it's searcher, anything. Send stuff to the graveyard, add stuff from your deck to your hand. Very, very important card. Stops you from summoning monsters from the extra deck. Well, that's kind of Dogmatika's gimmick anyway, and you don't really want to be summoning stuff from the extra deck most of the time with a pure Dogmatika deck at least. So that's definitely a 2-off pickup, and if it ever goes back to 3, which technically it can, it's not that broken anymore, then you probably want 3 of it. So you can already tell Dogmatika, not a very cheap deck. I have tried to do a ritual Dogmatika version on my channel. It isn't as great as like most other budget decks for that price range. You can still easily play it and it's still fun to play, but I don't think you can make a Dogmatika deck be very cheap and still decent as well as some other decks, for example. Moving on to the super rares, we have 2 Tri-brigade ones, 2 Tri-brigade Link monsters. They could have obviously been rares or normals, but let's be honest, I feel like Tri-brigades have received a fair treatment, so I'm not going to complain about that one. This one, very, very interesting. You can use it in Dogmatika decks as well, because you have the whole mulligan 1 effect when this card is sent to the graveyard. Also, it special summons stuff from your hand. So very interesting one. It is reasonably played in Tri-brigade if I'm not mistaken. I personally think the next one is the one that matters more because you can search your spell traps, but in the end it doesn't really make too much of a difference because you want to be running at least one of both of them anyway, because this one can be discarding 2 cards and then you can get some banished stuff back, but usually it's also used for the whole, if this card's sent to the graveyard, you can add 1 Tri-brigade spell trap from your deck to your hand and then place 1 card from your hand on the bottom of the deck. Bit annoying with this effect because obviously that effect doesn't work if you have no card in hand, because then you just add the card to the spell trap and then you have to put it back onto your deck. So yeah, a bit annoying. And also that effect locks you into special summoning Tri-brigade monsters for the rest of the turn, so keep that one in mind. But overall, a very, very good card. And for a super rare that you only need like once or twice, it is absolutely fine. We have Springans Merrymaker, a card that you want to be running at 2 at least, but 1 is okay-ish. But if you open this pack a few more times anyway, you should usually get up to 2, so it shouldn't be too hard. It can send stuff to the graveyard. Very, very interesting card for Springans, and usually the one where you put the gigantic champion Sargas on top of it. So there is that one. We have one of the rituals in here, and this is where I have to be a tiny bit annoyed about this pack because, well, the issue is that you have 2 ritual monsters as super rares, 2 that actually, well, harmonize. There's even a card that mentions both of them, and they are meant to be like the opposites. They're meant to like work together. I don't know what the lore is, but effect wise that's how it works, and even card effect wise from some other cards, that is what is meant to be doing. So that's a bit weird that only one of them is included in this pack. You have to craft the other one. Kind of strange decision by Konami, but it is what it is. White Knight of Dogmatika, not a brilliant card, a card that you can surely play. It has some issues. I incorporated it in my Dogmatika deck, but I don't think, depending on what Dogmatika variant you want to be playing, you don't need to go the ritual variant if you don't want to. There's plenty of control Dogmatika decks out there. I don't know if they're still as strong as they used to be, but yeah, you don't have to play these, but picking up one of this also won't be too bad. But usually you don't play more than 1 or 2 of this anyway. We have one of the best cards in the set, Dogmatika Ecclesia the Virtuous, because this one does so much for Dogmatikas, but you can already tell the most cards that you see in here that you have to pick up 3 of from the higher rarity cards are Dogmatika cards, so this is probably the deck that's going to be the most expensive for you. And funny enough, in my opinion, not the strongest one of the 3 decks, but it is what it is. You can see it any way you want to, and obviously depends on the current meta as well. Very, very nice effect. Special summons itself potentially, can't be destroyed by battle by extra deck monsters, and so on and so on. Searches your stuff, so very nice. And there's a way to summon this out of the deck by dumping one of the fusion monsters that you do need. You need 1 more ultra rare for this deck anyway, which is the fusion monster that mentions like the Albaz kind of line. So there is that one. We have Dogmatika Maximus, another Dogmatika card at a high rarity. Who would have thought? Ooh, well, not overly surprised. You get away with just running 1 or 2 of this. It's quite nice in a pure Dogmatika variant if you have a full extra deck of cards that make sense to be sent to the graveyard, but obviously that makes the deck a lot more expensive. So you can get away without playing this card, but if you want to play the full power Dogmatikas, you do need this one, because sending 2 cards from your extra deck to the graveyard is a massive resource gain if you have the right cards in your extra deck. We have one of the, well, worst cards, I would say. You don't really need this card at all. Even if so, you would only be playing a 1 if I'm not mistaken. And for the fact that it's super rare, you don't need to craft this. You will be able to play Tri-brigade even without this one. You can special summon from stuff from your deck, which isn't too bad. But you also cannot special summon monsters from the extra deck for the rest of this turn, except link monsters. So keep that one in mind, and that can be problematic from time to time. It works in a normal Tri-brigade deck, but it isn't the craziest card, because you kind of, well, the effects are negated of the monster you summon anyway, and so on and so on and so on. So it's good for like extending link plays, but other than that, it isn't necessarily the best card, but it's also not terrible. So it's a card that if you get it, you could try and play, but nothing that you need to be picking up from this specific set, especially if you want to be playing Tri-brigade more as an engine than as a pure variant. Springans Watch, one of the other Springans cards that actually is expensive, I want to say, is the card that has, well, it searches your field spell, and your field spell is very important, and also has the effect to dump stuff to the graveyard and add a Springans monster from your deck to your hand if the field spell is already up, which can be very, very good. So very strong cards, and you definitely want this as a 3-off. But I promise you, it's not going to get more expensive with Springans at least. And now we have reached the point where we are at the rares and the normals, which is good to know that there's some good ones in here. Most of them are archetypal cards. In the end, it doesn't really matter overly that much because you can craft all of them anyway most of the time if you have enough crafting material. And after opening enough packs for building this deck, you will have enough crafting material anyway if you get rid of lots of cards that you don't want to be using. So there's that. Okay, what do I think of this pack? Well, I would say this pack is a solid 8 out of 10. It has 3 archetypes in here that are fairly playable. None of them are like necessarily meta relevant anymore, but Springans with the new support, very, very good. Tri-brigade still very decent at least. And Dogmatika, if you have lots of gems, lots of extra deck monsters, you can make a variant that can climb up the ladder pretty well. But if you try to do it in a cheap way, or if you try to focus too much on the whole ritual route, then it's subpar. It's still very playable, still not a bad deck by any chance. Like, I've done gimmick puppets before this, so keep this one in mind. But yes, I would say 8 out of 10. It has 3 playable archetypes in here. 2 of them don't need that many cards, so even if you're just in here for the Dogmatikas, you will get the core, the skeleton of 2 different decks as well that you can be playing, and they're quite fun to play as well. So there's that. It couldn't be much better unless this was jam-packed with meta decks, so I feel like even a 9 wouldn't be too bad for this specific pack. Hope you enjoyed the pack review. Leave a like, comment, subscribe, but most importantly, I hope you have a nice day.